Welcome to Teaching Artistry with Courtney J. Boddie. That's me. This is a podcast that celebrates artists and advocates for community engagement. And this is We Can't Go Back, a video series in partnership with Creative Generation meant to examine, interrogate, and confront racist policies and systems in the arts. This series amplifies leaders in arts and culture who drive radical change in communities through anti-racist and liberatory practices. Subscribe to the Teaching Artistry with Courtney J. Boddie YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I live in Brooklyn, near Prospect Park, and it is on the stolen lands of the Lenape and Canarsie nations. And I identify as a Black cisgendered woman who, I often say here, I pay respect to my ancestors from across the African diaspora, but I've got my parents on my mind a lot, so I'm gonna really say I uplift them, Rose Boddie and Kurt Boddie. I also pay respect and uplift the Indigenous diaspora that are woven into my history and their DNA and my DNA through a network of solidarity and love from the Cherokee, Creek, and Uchi nations. Let's welcome our guest, Quanice Floyd. Hi, Quanice.
Hey, Courtney. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very inspired by your wings, your throne. Mm-hmm. So I had to pair up with you. So Quanice, can you tell us, what is your role in arts and arts education, and how do you embed liberatory and practices and anti-racism practices into your work?
Awesome. So Courtney, first I want to uplift my ancestors and as well as the lands that I'm on. So I'm on the stolen lands of the Piscataway, Nacotchtank, and Pamunkey tribes here in Washington, D.C. I also want to uplift those who came here or were stolen from their lands and brought over here. I want to uplift those who came here to look for a better life. Mm-hmm. I want to uplift those who were killed and who were sacrificed because of others' greed. Because I think those land acknowledgements have to honor those, the stories of not only our indigenous nations, but also how we intersect as people from enslaved peoples, as well as those who have left lands that were dangerous to come to America to find a better life for themselves, their families, and their future generations in their bloodline. So I just want to make sure that I'm uplifting all of those voices and all of those ancestors that are guiding us throughout this journey. So thank you for allowing me to do that. Hi, everyone, if you're listening. I'm Quanice Floyd. So my current position in the arts is that I am the Executive Director of Arts Education in Maryland schools. And so what that means is that I advocate for access to high quality arts education throughout the state of Maryland. So Maryland has over 900,000 students who are attending public schools. And so I fight to make sure that every single student has access to an arts class, honestly. And so I work a lot with educational advocacy organizations. I work a lot with teachers, teaching artists, fine arts supervisors. I work really closely with the Maryland State Department of Education. I also go down to the General Assembly of Maryland, which is our legislative body, and talk to a lot of policymakers and lawmakers. And I fight for students who look like me, because in communities that look like me, they're the ones where the arts get taken first quite often. And so a lot of our policymakers don't look like me. And so communicating that to them is often a challenge in many ways, because they don't quite understand, or maybe they do understand. So they might not understand, but they might understand the effects of how policy shifts communities. And how a policy affects our children every day, and how policy affects families and access to healthcare and access to everything else. So, so I embed anti-racism practices in my work, because I think my journey from anti-racism started when I was born, honestly. You know, I'm born a brown-skinned Black woman who is the descendant of slave owners and slaves, or the enslaved, I'll use that correct, slave owners and the enslaved. And, you know, just growing up, I grew up in New York City, which is what people consider a liberal, big city. But I grew up around a lot of different people with different backgrounds and different cultures. But that anti-Blackness is real. And my family understood that, because I remember even as a child, like my grandmother would have a Black angel on top of the Christmas tree. Or, you know, my aunt, for decorations, she would like shade the person's hue to be chocolate. You know, like there were things that they understood that couldn't quite be communicated to me at a younger age. So, you know, as a child, you don't quite notice things. But you know, that gave me more sense of self and sense of pride and sense of awareness coming into this world. And so all of those experiences, you know, the experiences of my elders, my ancestors, as well as my experience growing up as a Black woman in this world that might not necessarily care for me, is what I bring into the work that I do every day. Because not only is the world not caring for me, but it's also not caring for anybody else who looks like me. So when I talk about policymakers, like the first people on my mind are the people who look like me, the students who look like me, the little Quanices and, you know, who grew up in that same type of community I grew up, who had that, you know, great family that I grew up with, or who might not necessarily had a great family or a great family situation, and try to bring their stories, because those are the stories that are often untold or not even cared about when it comes to advocacy, when it comes to policy and lawmaking.
Well, I care about you. I heard you say, I fight for little brown and Black kids to have arts in their lives, and for those policymakers to understand why it's so important, and how their decisions, if they're not if they're not aware of what their decision-making policies are doing, or how they impact the different communities, especially the Black and brown communities, and how there's just so much to fight for. And from my perspective, the reason why this video series and the podcast is focused in the arts is because that's the work that I do. But it's also, like you said, we had homes that really steeped us in the arts, in a variety of like cultural arts and other kinds of arts, performing arts, right? Yeah. So I'm interested in artists, and when I say artists, I mean any type of person who practices. So I'm always curious about empowerment, and in this moment, artists and teachers are you know, hurting in many different ways and being told what to do in many different ways. So I'm curious about, at this moment, in this juncture, how can those of us who are in the arts field be emboldened, empowered to forge the future of arts and arts education from a very fiercely anti-racist lens?
I just want to acknowledge that anti-racism isn't just a lens. These are people's lives literally at stake, right? Like, it's not something you could take on and take off at points in times, but it's something that you can learn to grow into and continue to do throughout your journey, right? And so I guess I'll give a little anecdote, right? Like, I often, as a public school teacher, I taught in the public schools for almost 10 years as an elementary music teacher. And so there were real systemic and institutional issues that I had personally with public education. But then there's also like interpersonal issues that I had with the way certain teachers would talk to certain students, or they would treat certain students. And so within the four walls of my classroom as a teacher, like I gave my students all of my love. Like, they were my kids. I called them boos. Like, you know, when I say, hey, boo, they'd be like, hey, Miss Floyd. So, like, I even had one, a new student come into class one time, and I called that student boo. And then he was like, did she say boo? And then my other student was like, yeah, that's how you know she loves you. And so, like, that's like, that was the love that I gave my students. Like, they knew how much I loved them. And so I realized that within the four walls of my classroom, I can control the situation, but outside of the four walls of the classroom, I couldn't control that situation. And so what I did is I tried to make it as warm, as loving, as reflective of them as possible. So like if you ever came into my classroom, I would have pictures of Selena and Romeo Santos, and I had Bob Marley, and I had Louis Armstrong. So I had, you know, all types of Marian Anderson. So all types of Black and brown musicians and artists all around my room. And it was really interesting because they used my room one time as like as part of the tour. And like teachers were like, oh my goodness, like I've never seen a music room like that. Yeah, because yeah. Yeah, let's just say that. And so like, I often looked at the curriculum that we had, and the curriculum was so Eurocentric, it was so whitewashed that it didn't tell any other story but the white story. And so I'm a rebellious child. In many instances, you can ask my aunt, she always tells me like, you do what you want to do anyway, which is true, because I do what I want to do regardless of how anybody else feels. So I used a lot of different instructional strategies that related to my students. My students look like me, so I know if I was a student in this class, what would I want to hear? What do I want to do? And I asked them too, like, what do you want to hear? What do you want to do? This is music class. We're going to have fun. And we're going to bring you into the space. We're bringing you into the space, not other people. And so like I would incorporate like African drumming, and I would incorporate like cultural, they call it cultural music. I hate using that phrase, but like world music, they use that phrase for anything that's not white. But we would incorporate, you know, music from Central America, South America, Africa, Caribbean. Like I was bringing all of that into the music classroom and still meeting the indicators that was required of me, but just in a different way. And so I had an assistant principal come to the classroom one time, and I had a great lesson. And then when I had my observation follow-up, she basically said, well, you know, what exactly were you teaching? So I said, yeah, I was teaching this indicator, this standard, this indicator, this standard. And she was like, well, that's not what's in the curriculum. I said, I know it's not in the curriculum, but the standards and the indicators are in the curriculum. Well, they don't need to be playing drums no more. They don't need to be doing that no more. And I'm like, no, I'm gonna still do that because my students love it. They're meeting the indicator, they're meeting the standard, and that's actually it. Like, I understand where you're coming from, but if you look at this curriculum, they want us to sing Danny Boy and Yankee Doodle and Old Man River. And my students are doing the same thing, but with a more cultural aspect to it. Like they're doing things that relate to what the music they listen to at home, and we're bringing that into the classroom. And so, you know, after that, I got written up quite a few times. So like they would come to the room and say that I'm not following curriculum quite a few times, and it wasn't true. So with that, I don't know if I'm going off on a tangent, but
no, a couple of things I want to just say. I love how I want to make that a quote, like I'm bringing you into this classroom.
Yeah. And
the fact that you were written up for not doing the curriculum, it feels very supremacist.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
Yeah.
What if you're hitting the standards are the standards, and that's suggested.
Right.
How to hit the standard is supposed to be suggested, and how you were doing it was about making it culturally relevant to those kids and bringing joy,
right,
and love of music and love of self into the space, that warmth that you were talking about. And for that, you're getting written up. That's problematic.
Yeah. So yeah, getting written up. So like I said, to answer your overall like question for that, people should just do it. do what you think feels right. Like I did what I did because it felt right. I knew it was right, and it was for the betterment of my students. And so as long as you have that moral compass in the actions that you do, I think that's where you can start. Do it, understand it, and if it feels right, then, just move forward with it.
But let's go into that, like concrete examples or actions that we can take, whether it's in an arts institution, in an institution like Broadway, right? Or within an educational system that is what could feel like unmovable.
Mm-hmm.
What are some actions that you've already given us? One, do you, and
Right.
do what feels right for those young people that you're working with. But what are some other ways that we could restructure, dismantle, dissolve, whatever the terminology there is, those oppressive systems? Like we've been going to this National Educators anti-racism conference, and they were talking about formative and summative assessments and how that needs to go away.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is putting kids in these boxes that if they don't do this exact thing, much like you were being written up for not doing the curriculum, then it means that they're failing or falling behind. So that's one example of like, how can we change those systems that are embedded in white supremacy?
Yeah, that's a great question. If we're thinking on a personal level, like if somebody's listening to this and wondering that question, the first thing I would like to say to them is to think the opposite of how they usually think. Honestly, like particularly in the arts field, like what I'm seeing is a lot of people saying we're pivoting, right? We're pivoting. We're hoping to return back to normalcy or a sense of normalcy. And normal wasn't helpful for a lot of people. So we need to think more about the boxes that we're already kind of embedded in and ingrained in. And I think one one of the things that I had a personal experience with, I'm currently in a doctoral program, and I was in a course, and the course is called Transformational Leadership. And in the course, we had to have group projects, and the project was to basically reimagine what school would look like. And so my group had principals. I think we had a few like folks who were corporate, but it was mostly like teachers and principals. And so we were going through like this checklist of like what a school should look like. And they would say things like, yeah, school should be in the building. So, here I come, rebellious one. Why does school need to be in the building? Well, it's always been like that. Who said it needs to continue to be like that, right? Like, you have to push those social constructs and those norms that we're so used to. Even thinking about like curriculum, right? Like just because, I'll give you a better example. During COVID, a lot of people have been pushing saying, oh, my students is not going to be where they're supposed to be. Who said that's where they're supposed to be? Why is someone's safety being put at risk because you want your student to be on grade level? Who says we can't wait for that later on down the line? Like, who says that just because there's a global crisis happening, right? Like, they need to stay on grade level. Like, who says, why are we like putting our students at risk because we want them to stay on grade level, or we want them to take the SAT, or we want them to, apply to college on time? Like, all of those are social constructs, right? Like when you're 17, you take your pre-SAT, you take your SAT, you go to college. Says who though? Right? Like, that's thinking outside the norm. Just because those have been norms that we're used to, that doesn't mean it has to happen. So, we don't have to rush our students back into school because you want them to be on grade level. First off, who says this is grade level? Like, it's a whole thing. So yeah, that's kind of where I am. But yes, just challenge the social norms, challenge the social constructs, think outside the box, stretch yourself to think outside the box. Is often difficult for people because this is what we're used to, right? Like, this is a routine that we've had done for years on years on years on years, right? Like, even with the assessment piece, I saw a post from, I think it was like, I can't think of the name of the Facebook page, but it was a Facebook page that had a post, and it basically said, we are the results of, we are currently the results of eugenics in America. And so basically it was talking about how the eugenics movement, you know, helped push forward like the standardized testing movement. And so how standardized testing caters more to Eurocentric white knowledge bases. But that the fact that what we're currently going through now in COVID is related to that, because there's a whole anti-science movement, which is a result of eugenics. Because eugenics, for those who don't know eugenics was a subset in science where there were white scientists who had these skewed studies to prove that white people were superior to any other type of people, specifically Black people, but other people too. And so that's what they were saying about this current movement of people not wanting to wear masks, and people saying that their civil rights are being, you know, violated because they have to wear masks, is that is eugenics. This is the child of eugenics. These are the effects of eugenics in an anti-science world to appease white people. So like, it's really fascinating to see how white supremacy does play out in multiple ways. But yeah, back to the overall question, just challenge social constructs, challenge normalcy, challenge your natural way of thinking with everything that you do. Question yourself.
I love that. Period.
Thank you.
I'm still sort of reeling about what you just said around that post, but I was thinking about you keep saying, you know, me, I'm the what did you call yourself? The
rebellious one.
The rebellious one. I think you're an instigator.
Yeah.
I think you're a co-conspirator, that's for sure. But I think you're not just a rebellious one. Like you're kind of a visionary that instigates and provocates and pokes. And I think that
I do like to poke. My partner says I poke him all the time. So
let's go into that. I love this idea of like really try and strip yourself as much as you can from the binds that that society has put us into, those social constructs that we have been squozen into. That's the word.
Yeah.
So thinking like the sky's the limit, like anything is possible. Maybe not in our lifetime, but what does a fully liberated, racially just world look like?
I think that's a great question, because nobody knows the answer to it. And I think that's what causes the fear in a lot of people, because they don't know what it looks like. But if you strip your thinking, you'll be open to what it would look like. You know, like, why be afraid of that when it supports and helps everyone? And I think one thing I learned, you know, I was talking to you earlier about art equity and my experience there. One of my realizations was that once we have an equitable and just world, white people will realize what they were missing this whole time. Honestly, like, they don't realize what they're missing right now. Like, they don't realize how our experiences and our depth of knowledge has honestly lasted for generations, right? Like, I'm still here because there were brilliant people in my bloodline who survived, and that's a part of me, right? And yeah, we all get to grow and get to learn from that. We all get to learn from one another. We'll all have the opportunity to love one another and to really, really utilize the amazingness of each other.
You're reminding me, I saw Ibram X. Kendi talk at Prince's library or some beautiful webinar maybe about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he was saying something similar about how those who are white presenting and those who have proximity to whiteness, how we all benefit, how they, like, the world, they will be unshackled as well.
Right.
If we all push towards this idea. And I think you're right, there is some fear, but it actually gives me hope to be able to think and ask questions like that.
Yeah.
It gives me a little bit of direction in my journey about where am I going, where am I going, and how does that benefit my immediate world and society writ large.
Right.
Quanice, I know you forever. Thank you so much for being just so open to talking to me and us, and for those wings behind you. That throne is balls. Just
beneath my wings. Thank you for having me. This is really great.
Oh, yay.
Yeah, this is awesome.
Yay.
I got to be raw today. I said I got to be a little raw today.
This is what I enjoyed, the raw. I like raw.
Yeah.
It's good. It's real good. Well, thank you again. And thank you everyone for watching Teaching Artistry with Courtney J. Boddie. This conversation and more will be on the audio platform. So subscribe to SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And before we were saying that, let's unshackle ourselves. Let's strip away the boxes. We won't go back. We can't go back. Onwards.
Now is my time to shine. When your time comes, don't postpone it. When others doubt and out, you don't condone it. Truth be told, yourself is your toughest opponent. When your moment comes, grab hold and own it. Never let go, stand tall and hold tight. Overcoming obstacles is the objective in life. Doubters overnight, and unto them you shine bright. Cause inside your head, on goes the light. Ignite.